Hello again, GLL, back for another video. This will be another direct response to FAVYN. Now, if you want to know why all this fucking shit started, it's because I did a video way back about sprint, because it was all about how nobody really tested any movement speeds or anything, and I did this long ass boring video about how long it takes to walk from one end of Valhalla to the other in each game with and without sprint, and then some other fucking little bits of levels dotted in there, blood gulch and whatever, to see how far it is with and without sprint, how long it takes you to get to point A to point B. And the results were that from one end of Valhalla to the other with sprint you are 10 seconds faster. That doesn't include infinite sprint, that's just regular sprint, and that's in Halo 4, I believe. But bear in mind, Halo 4 has a higher movement speed, so the sprint doesn't do a whole hell of a lot. That was my whole fucking argument. FAVYN then took that video, used what I said in that video, took my analysis from that video, and then said in another video what he did about sprint, that sprint does nothing, has no effect on anything whatsoever, as in actually getting you from point A to point B. You're actually just as quick as you were without, which was wrong, so I corrected him on that. And he was still saying that sprint was, you know, stupid and whatever, double melees and all that. And I just don't agree with any of that. I think it's a load of bollocks. There's been no science or investigation done whatsoever, and he continues to assert these points. And they're the same points that everybody asserts, but nobody actually follows up with any evidence or anything. So I'm going to see what he's saying here, and maybe he might have fucking picked up a few things from that other video. Now, he said he never watched my last video, so if he never watched my last video, it was an hour long, he won't have learnt anything. Let's take a look.
You're tired of talking about sprint, I'm tired of talking about sprint, but maybe the reason we're so tired of the topic is because we've been talking about it the wrong way. Every discussion is focused solely on the mechanic itself. Here's why sprint's bad, or here's why it's good. It's an illusion. A shooter this day and age can't survive without it. It stretches maps, it activates mechanics like slide and charge, and it's a back and forth struggle with one group defending it and one group attacking it. Many of you who follow my channel know which side of the spectrum I fall on. I am an anti-sprint Halo player. And there's a good chance a lot of you found my channel based on my initial sprint video. And in that video I fully admit to taking an aggressive, borderline degrading stance on the topic. I basically took the position that, hey, I'm going to essentially destroy every possible defense for sprint I can think of and try and show people that the mechanic is bad. I'm not taking that video down, and I stand by the things I said even though I made a few mistakes, but quite honestly that video wasn't meant to get 20,000 views. I didn't even want to cover the topic, but my subscribers at the time wanted my opinion and I gave it. If you like that video,
Don't believe that for a second, Fav. Just throwing that out there. I don't believe for a second that you didn't want to cover that topic, because it's all you fucking talk about, even in your non-sprint videos. You consistently talk about sprint in other videos that you've made too, not just that one.
then I'm glad you did. If you thought it was funny, then cool, but if you liked the mechanic and you thought I was a little insulting, well, I don't necessarily blame you based on how I presented my arguments. In my opinion, that video isn't up to my personal standards. Looking back, I think I can do a better job explaining the topic. I also hate how I made a couple minor mistakes in that video, none that destroy my points as a whole, but enough to infuriate me and basically make that video unwatchable in my eyes. So here I am again, about to take on the infamous sprint debate again. I've grown up as a content creator. I feel confident in which situations and which topics I should be more analytical or more ranty in, and I think in a...
When you say you've grown up as a content creator, do you mean that you've got advice from LNG and Fletch over on Twitter? Because that's what I know is happening. Okay, that's why you never mention my name. Okay, that's why you never mention anybody's name. You just kind of do your own thing because that's what you've been instructed to do by the old save crew over there in the old safe space. You've been instructed to not respond to me.
topic as divisive as this, I need to be a little bit more careful. Because this isn't about making people who like Sprint feel stupid. I don't want to insult you or dismiss your opinions on the topic or even convince you not to like it, because this video isn't about Sprint being bad. It's about why a Halo without Sprint can be just as good. And to do that, first we need to differentiate the two games. Many look at Sprint as an addition. It takes the old Halo formula and it simply makes it faster. It adds more dynamics. Sprinting becomes a choice. It leaves you at a disadvantage because you can't shoot and acts as a strategic option. It adds this, it adds that. The more buttons to do stuff in the game, the better the game is. Well, I don't believe that Sprint adds or enhances the old Halo experience. Instead, I think it makes it a different experience entirely. And it's 100% okay if you like that new experience, but I at least want you to recognize it as different, not as an addition or enhancement. Because movement in a game's mobility has a much bigger impact than simply changing the player's speed. Movement and the way it interacts with combat can create completely new experiences entirely. So let's look at the experience of Halo 5. It's a high mobility game. It's packed with options: running, sliding, clambering, thrusting out of the way of incoming attacks, jumping out over the map and crashing.
Hold on a minute. No. So you're backtracking on your whole Sprint argument, and now you're just talking about mobility, which is broad as fuck. That's like me going from talking about armor lock, and now I'm just talking about armor abilities. So you've just broadened your argument, when your whole argument before was literally about Sprint, hammering the points when you had nothing to back that up, and you still don't look like you've done any research into this whatsoever. And some idiot on the other end of the screen is going to be like, well, what do you mean research? I mean, he hasn't actually physically done the fucking maths. What distance away does someone need to be sprinting at you to die from a DMR? We know a DMR will give you 5 shots in reach. We know a DMR will be 4 shots in Halo 4 and 5, or whatever. Or do we? Do the maths. How long does it take from somebody to short shooting to kill somebody? How far away is that person going to be? Until you establish that, any fucking notion that you can run up to somebody and punch them is redundant, because you haven't got that evidence.
Down with a badass ground pound, or basically becoming a human missile and Spartan charging through like 3 dudes. It's high octane, it's competitive, it's action packed, and I'm not going to sit here and bullshit myself and act like it doesn't have any appeal. It has solid mechanics. Its map design complements these mechanics with a lot of verticality and open spaces for the enhanced mobility to really shine. That's what Halo 5 offers, a complicated, action-packed first-person shooter experience, and many people simply look at all of these things as an addition, like I said before. They are just taking the old formula and giving it steroids. That's what people in the comments will tell you, that's what the media outlets will tell you. Hell, even Frank O'Connor describes Spartan abilities in this way. But is it...
Why do people continually bring up Frank O'Connor? The guy is not a game developer. He's just the head of PR at 343. He will tell you whatever the fuck you want to hear. So when you say even Frank O'Connor, who else is going to tell you that the game's fucking brilliant, all singing, all dancing? That's his fucking job. That's his only job.
Really? Let's look at these movement abilities. Sprinting, clamber, thruster pack, all of them when activated prohibit the player from shooting. It's not definitively a bad thing, right? You sacrifice combat readiness for evasiveness, trade-offs, balance, strategy, good stuff. But what this does is it separates the movement from combat. Again, not a bad thing by default. Many games, in fact most games, have this dynamic. But let's look at classic Halo games. They did something pretty cool, more akin to traditional arena shooters, in that their movement and their combat existed on the same plane. The gameplay in which you moved and the gameplay in which you shoot were the same. You didn't have to switch over to your mobility mode to properly traverse the maps and make jumps. You didn't have to put your gun down to chase your opponent down. Combat and movement happen simultaneously. And this sort of gameplay is incredibly exciting for a completely different set of reasons than why Halo 5 is exciting. It changes everything. It changes map design. It changes time to kill. It changes how you navigate.
It does not change map design. It doesn't. How can it change map design? We've been through this. Halo Reach has maps from Halo 2. Halo Reach has maps that are smaller than maps from Halo 2. Halo Online has sprints. And several people from Halo Online have come out and said it does not affect the fucking maps. Halo Online has Halo 3 maps. That's it. It's just Halo 3. It's just Halo 3 with the Russian edition. Halo 3 itself has bigger maps than the original Halo 2. There was no sprint change. There was no sprint added from Halo 2, from Halo to Halo 3, so why did the maps get bigger? Okay, the maps getting bigger has nothing to do with fucking sprint. It doesn't.
It changes how you engage and pursue in combat. It changes how combat plays out. Everything is different. And I think a good place to start with why a no-sprint Halo is good is because how the lack of movement options affect map design. When you can't change your speed, that means the maps are designed around the speed that every single person on the map runs at. When the maps are designed around the base speed rather than the enhanced speed, it means jumps and cover are designed for the same speed that you use when you engage in combat. There is no separation. When you shoot and navigate at the same time, it means you have to be conscious of both. Have you ever...
But that's assuming that the maps are actually designed around the speed of the faster combat, because they could just as easily be designed around the standard speed and then the speed could be added on top. Don't you understand what you're saying? Take Halo Online for example. Halo 3, you add sprint. They did not design the maps around sprint, yet the sprint has no effect on the fucking maps. You see? Well, I wouldn't say no effect, but more or less no effect. That's what people are saying. So sprint can work in Halo 3. So sprint can work in Halo 3. This notion that maps have to be made bigger, have to be changed, it's a load of bollocks. It doesn't wash, because it doesn't have to be anything. You can take a game like Halo 3 and add sprint to it, and it doesn't hardly do anything.
Ever noticed in Halo 5 how so many of the engagements seem to take place on these flat surfaces with very sparse cover? It seems spread out, and that's by design. It gives players room to use all of these fancy tricks like thruster pack and sprint.
How do you know that? 343 are a bunch of idiots. How do you know that it's designed that way?
And charge, and I've already given my thoughts on why I think those things work with Halo 5's gameplay. But in that golden era of Halo, that period of time where Halo was the top shooter on the market, its combat functioned very differently than it did now. Yes, your movement was limited, but because the maps were more compact and the time to kill was a bit longer, it gave you time to think. It forced players to use the environment to beat the opponent, not the thruster pack button. Say you're getting shot in the back. Rather than thrusting and then sprinting away, a player would duck his head and stare at the ground while crouch jumping, both making it much harder for the pursuer to land a killing blow. Then, he may get to cover, but he can't outright run away because there's no sprint. So instead he turns around and he bounces a nade, making it much harder for the pursuer to land off the wall, and times it perfectly so that his opponent will come around the corner at just the right time to land a reversal headshot on them. Because movement is consistent, there becomes a time when players...
But you can do the same thing with sprint. It's another scenario you come up with. This is all you do. You come up with scenarios. You've done no research. Where's the research? Where's the where's the how easily it is to get away from somebody? We're all the same speed. So if we're all the same speed, if you're chasing somebody at the exact same speed as they're running away. So where's this data? Where's this information? Where are you getting these scenarios from? There's no data for this. There's no input or information for this. It's just your opinion being asserted. Once again, you've got no evidence for this. You don't.
Are able to predict other players' movements, and it adds a completely new dynamic of perception that is severely diminished when players can go anywhere they want at any time at a varying degree of speeds. This level of consistency is appealing, and when it's combined with Halo's time to kill, with its tactics, and with its compact map design, it creates a very tight and unique gameplay experience. Movement has a much greater impact than simply making things faster. It might set the pace of the game, but depending on how you move and interact with the environment, it has the potential to change the game entirely. So I want to give some other examples of games and their movement systems and show how they respectively affect each game. And I'm going to start off with a strange example in Resident Evil 4. Now, Resident Evil 4 is not a first-person shooter. It's not a competitive game. It's not even the same setting or genre. So why am I so dumb in using it as one of my examples? Because Resident
I don't know. Why are you? What's that got to do with sprint in Halo? Seriously. Why don't you just use Gears of War? At least that would be fucking more relevant.
Evil 4 has a very interesting system when it comes to movement and combat. The movement and combat in Resident Evil 4 is separated. In fact, it's so separated to the point where when you go to shoot in Resident Evil 4, you can't move at all. Now, this seems, using typical ADD gamer logic, like a bad thing. It's restricting, it can be cumbersome and sluggish, but it's also genius. It's so instrumental for the pace of that game. You move at a very slow walking pace and can hold a button to enter into this little trot, and you can't even move side to side, rather you slowly turn the direction you want to go. You can't blind fire. If you ever have to shoot, you have to aim first, and when you do that, you can't move. You can't even move while meleeing. And yet, despite all these, Resident Evil 4 is considered a masterpiece, one of the single greatest video games of all time, and I would...
Hold on a minute. Resident Evil 4 is considered one of the best video games of all time. Really? Don't you think you're overrating it just a little bit? Okay, you've just named a million things that some people are going to hate, so it's like a fucking Marmite game, isn't it? Some people love it, some people fucking hate it. Now that could be your argument for where you're going with this, but the point is, that has nothing to do with the sprint in Halo. That's not even a similar mechanic, so I see what you're trying to do there, but you're really clutching at straws here, because that is so far away from what you're talking about, it might as well not exist. Okay. Now, Gears of War is known as one of the fucking best games on the fucking 360. And in that game, you can run at fucking high speed and pull the trigger when you fucking see somebody.
Echo that statement till my dying breath. And why is that? Because the game is built around these limitations. The fact that you can't move and shoot at the same time creates a very tense dynamic, where your enemies are always getting closer. But to compensate for this, they move very slowly. They'll slowly spread out, escaping your focus field of view. Occasionally, one will...
I can't understand why people talk about zombie games and like overhype them. It is what it is. It's a zombie game.
Run at you or throw something at you, and because the game makes you stop and stand still, it means you have to manage all of these things at the same time, and that creates a tense combat experience, an experience that makes sense in a game like Resident Evil. If you were allowed to move, all of these dynamics would basically be thrown out the window. Who cares if they were spreading out? You could just back up to increase your field of view. Who cares if they threw an axe at you? Rather than being forced to quickly shoot it out of the air, you could just sidestep it. The movement, or rather lack of movement in this case, sets the pace of the game. And interestingly enough, removing the ability to move at all somehow in Resident Evil 4's case makes the game more intense, and the game very intelligent.
What's going to happen now? He's going to go, and Resident Evil 5's fucking shit. Watch this.
Incorporates gameplay elements to even further add to the nerve-wracking pace. Rather than allowing you to strafe or back up while shooting, the game instead has a quick turn where Leon, the protagonist, will quickly face the opposite direction. This serves a function in eliminating the slow turn for navigation purposes, but once again, whether by a happy accident or ingenious game design, enhances the combat and the pace, because you can't back up and you can't move, and sometimes you have to. They got to you.
Well.
Maybe you had to reload. Maybe you let one flank you and you need to get out of there. But so you put your gun down and you quick turn and you run back and you turn around again. Genius. Why is this genius? Because it complements the game's limitations and enhances the established pace. It allows players to have an option of escape. They're not completely helpless, which I think is a good thing, but the method in which you escape danger heightens the tension rather than alleviates it, because it forces you to turn your back on the encounter. All of these guys that were running at you, yeah, you can't see them anymore.
He's so off topic now.
Because the game limits your vision to the direction you are facing. So you know they're there, you know they're coming for you, and you know when you turn around, you better be ready, because there's no telling what's going to be waiting for you when you quick turn back around and raise your gun back up. Maybe an enemy started charging you, or an enemy that had flanked you earlier is throwing a machete at you and have about half a second to shoot it out of the air before it kills you. Limitations setting the pace of the game, and the game being designed around it. All of these encounters and experience possible because Resident Evil 4 makes you shoot the way it makes you shoot, because it makes you move the way it makes you move. Adding a sprint feature or a dodge roll wouldn't make Resident Evil 4 a better game. In fact, I think it would ruin it. It would have to be completely redesigned. And I very briefly want to address a comment I'm sure I'll get for using Resident Evil 4 as an example, and that's, well, you claim you want Halo to keep its formula, but you use Resident Evil 4 as an example for why it should. Resident Evil 4 dramatically changed from the previous games in the series, yet here you are saying it's amazing. Do you like change or do you not? And I'm telling you, the answer is not black and white. It's not change is bad or change is good. It's how did it change? Resident Evil 4 did not change into something that already existed. It innovated. It didn't say, hey, what's Silent Hill doing? Or what is Alone in the Dark doing? It changed to be different. It changed to set itself apart using an, at the time, very unique perspective. Resident Evil 4 popularized the over-the-shoulder third-person view. No other games were really doing that. All the horror games at the time used the overhead, not necessarily always fixed camera angles, but a camera system that was detached from the player. Resident Evil 4 changed to be different from everything else in its genre, not to try and use what worked for another game. That's what separates games like Resident Evil 4 from games like Halo 4. Halo 4 didn't change to be different. Halo 4 didn't change because it wanted to be bold and revolutionary. Halo 4 changed in the exact same way every other shooter was changing in that time. Resident Evil 4 led, while Halo 4 followed. I'm 100% okay with change, but it has to make sense. That's not to say games can't take little things from one another, but so many of the changes Halo 4 made completely contradicted the pace and style of the game, and for a game that features an incredibly popular competitive multiplayer component, that just isn't acceptable. Yes, Resident Evil 4...
Yeah, but this is a broader argument about the entire game, not about sprint and movement, so you're off topic.
Changed a lot. Some may say it changed too much, and I will 100% agree that future installments after it have gone in the wrong direction and completely missed the point. Co-op ruins...
What did I say? What did I say so many minutes earlier? Now he's going to say, and Resident Evil 5, shit. There you go.
The tension. The stupid shit they added in Resident Evil 6 ruins everything else, but that's not Resident...
You see?
Resident Evil 4's fault. That's the ineptitude of the designers that came after it, who were unable to see the reason Resident Evil 4 was as successful as it was. They thought it was the action and the combat, when it was really basically everything else about it. You look at the movement of a game like Dead Space. I'm using horror games because it's a little easier to describe the pacing of one, but Dead Space shares the third-person perspective that Resident Evil 4 had, yet somehow the pacing is very different. You're a little bit faster, you can move and shoot at the same time, you have tools that let you manipulate objects, and the game is again designed around the movement and the combat, because in Dead Space, enemies are much faster, and while you can move around and back up, you have less time, and it creates tension. On top of that, combat functions differently as well, where simply shooting an enemy won't work. You have to precisely dismember them to kill them, and when you add that on top of the much faster enemies, it creates a unique gameplay system. Dead Space even has a unique depletable power called stasis that lets you slow enemies. Really interesting game design in my opinion. To smoothly make my way back to shooters, or not so smoothly, I'll use my last example as an arena shooter. Let's just say Unreal Tournament. Now, Unreal Tournament doesn't have sprint, it doesn't have ADS, and it has weapon pickups on the map, and yet it's completely different to Halo. Unreal Tournament is way faster. Its weapons act completely differently. Its movement and fluidity throughout the map isn't even a second cousin to how you move in Halo. It uses health pickups and armor pickups, and all of these things go into making it what it is. I don't want Halo to make you stop moving every time you have to shoot. I don't want Halo to make you aim for the limbs, and I don't want Halo to let you run at Mach 5 speeds while you lead rocket shots for direct hit kills. I just want Halo to be its own thing. And the reason I spent so damn long talking about Resident Evil is because I want to show what I felt to be a good example of how gameplay and movement and limitations affect the game around it. And that's the underlying principle that applies to my argument for Halo.
But it's not a good example, is it? How is that a good example? You're talking about a game that came out in 2004 and you're trying to say, well, this game worked like this, but we're not talking about that game. We're talking about Halo. We're talking about Halo from the first Halo till now, and how what changes have happened, and sprint in particular, and movement, and how they have changed, and how you say they negatively impact on the gameplay. When in actual fact, sprint itself does relatively nothing, so you've had to broaden your entire argument to movement to try and fucking claw back some of that fucking logic there, because you know you've got no fucking argument for sprint by the sound of it, and now it's movement. Well, of course, sidestepping round a wall is a lot more overpowered than just walking forwards. Okay? So obviously being able to thrust and jump is another thing altogether. These are all different things, different parts of the game, not just sprint. So you've broadened your argument now. I don't see how Resident Evil factors into what you're saying at all. Okay, the idea you're trying to say is that Resident Evil was basically this amazing game. It was perfect because it had shitty controls. Well, there's going to be a load of people that completely disagree with that. I'm one of them. Because to me, Resident Evil 4 was a pile of shit. I mean, okay, it was playable. So to me, using that as an example of how the game is perfectly balanced and whatever, it doesn't go into that because yeah, it's got slow enemies because it's a fucking zombie game. And that's basically it. I mean, Resident Evil is known for having piss poor controls. It's kind of the thing. But what does that have to do with Halo and Sprint? How do you factor that in? How does that have anything to do with this? It doesn't make any difference. Because if you're trying to say, yes, well, this affects the game in this way, and then you're trying to apply that to Halo, what you're saying is there, because Resident Evil would be completely different if you change the controls, then Halo will be completely different if you add sprints and movements. But as we've established, sprint does not do anything. Movement does something. Like Spartan charging is a joke, but that's my opinion. And you can fucking twist it and turn it around, but the Resident Evil point just doesn't fucking do anything for you because we're not talking about anything to do with Resident Evil. Just because Resident Evil's fucking gameplay is this doesn't equate to Halo as anything. It doesn't. It's not a good example to use. If you'd use something like, and then you Unreal Tournament, like, really? I mean, what are you saying? I mean, a lot of the shit from Halo is from Unreal Tournaments, like all the stuff like Capture the Flag and game modes and stuff. That's all like goes way back to like Unreal Tournament and Quake and shit like that. That's where that shit comes from, and that's brought into Halo. Now, the whole idea of Halo is, yeah, it's a slower game, but the actual sprint mechanic has no real effect on that fucking gameplay that was, the core gameplay from the original fucking trilogy, as we've seen in Halo Reach. So, I don't see what you're going on about with that Resident Evil and Unreal Tournament. I really don't.
Halo had a distinct pace. It had a unique movement system that the game was built around. It was unique in its space. It had even starts, weapon control, unseparated gameplay, but it was a little slower, less crazy, less twitchy, had regenerative health, weapon limitations, consistent and easily recognizable time to kills. It's such intricate design, and it was different. So to say that adding sprint and adding thruster packs and adding clamber enhances that experience just doesn't make sense. It has to change it, because like I just spent the last 5 minutes trying to explain and really hammer home, when you change the movement of a game, it changes everything around it. And that's what's happened with Halo. Whether you like the new Halo or not, the point is that all of its changes have made it something else.
But you're broadening your whole argument from sprint into mobility. So what you said before is now completely redundant to this argument. You are now talking about mobility, which is a completely different argument. If you're not going to come out and say that you were wrong about sprint, then how can you then just broaden your argument and forget about everything you said about sprint? You need to correct yourself where you were fucking wrong in the first place before you start saying this, that, and the other about mobility.
Like I said before, change isn't always inherently bad, but in this case, Halo has changed using the same things every other shooter has used to change. Enhanced mobility, sprint, sliding, thruster packs, all these things are things we see in tons of first-person shooters nowadays. Call of Duty, Destiny, Titanfall, Lawbreakers, Overwatch, they all offer up this trend of enhanced movement. Whether it be thrusters, jetpacks, teleporting, wall running, sprinting, sliding, they all have it in some capacity, with a few having extra wrinkles thrown in and some missing a few pieces here and there, but hopefully the point is made. What Halo turned into isn't necessarily unique, and I'll give Halo 5 a slight pass because it at least managed to incorporate it in an even starts arena environment, but it's...
No, you should never give Halo 5 a pass, man. That's the first rule.
still followed the trends, and Halo 4 followed the trends. And if I don't miss my guess, Halo 6 will follow the trends, and we'll see shit like wall jumping and super moves that we shouldn't worry about because, you know, everybody can do it, so it's balanced. Without sprint, without enhanced mobility, Halo completely different.
Halo 6 is going to be a free-to-play game for the Windows 10 and Xbox One, and it will be fully microtransactioned. Though it probably won't, but it could do. Why not?
Differentiates itself from the pack. There has not been a game like the original Halo trilogy since 2007, which happened to be Halo 3.
2010, Halo Reach.
This is another benefit of a no-sprint Halo. It instantly differentiates itself from every other game out there. It doesn't have to compete with COD, or Titanfall, or Destiny, because it removes itself from that style and stands on its own. Halo becomes its own thing, and people don't play it because it plays like another game, they play it because it's its own game. And it doesn't do things that other games do or play like other games do. Everybody says Halo has to be different or else it will end up like COD. But how does adding features that COD has make it less like COD? In my opinion, at this point in the market, not having sprint would be what's different now. People keep saying Halo has to change, but Halo's had sprint since 2010. At this point, removing it would be the change and keeping it would be the stagnant thing to do. Finally, I think you could argue that removing all of these movement options allow for more creativity in the game that surrounds it. You see, having a lack of sprint does have inconveniences. Some players do feel slow, and sometimes it makes getting across the map a chore. But sprint is the easy way to fix these issues. It's the uncreative way. I think solving these problems through the environments and gameplay itself would be a lot more interesting than just changing the game outright. And we've seen this in the past.
But we've established that sprint does not make that much of an impact on your speed. Whether noobs think it does or it doesn't, you're only a bit faster. So that doesn't affect the fucking game. Whether it makes people not want to play the fucking game because they can't sprint is another fucking matter. That's not an argument for why sprint should or shouldn't be in the fucking game.
Halo used to use teleporters a lot, but they weren't engaging or really interesting gameplay-wise, so Bungie came up with a man cannon that flung you across the map and kept you in combat so that other players could score really satisfying man cannon kills, and so could the player flying through the air. There's no telling what other creative movement options can be created with this way of thinking.
By Bungie, not by 343, because 343 are not creative. They're incompetent and they don't have a clue. So there's nothing that 343 is going to come out with that's going to be amazing. And also, man cannons were in fucking Unreal Tournament, a game that you were just talking about recently. They were launch pads in Unreal Tournament. They were launch pads in Quake. They've been in games for years. They weren't fucking original. They were just a new spin on them gravity launch pads from Unreal Tournament and that. So, again, you're saying they did this, that, and the other, but really what they did was copy something from Unreal Tournament. So that's a mistake. It wasn't something new. It was something come from another game, much like Sprint. You never talk about how Halo 2 was going to have Sprint, but then it got cancelled because they decided not to do it. You never talk about jetpacks. You never talk about armor lock. You never talk about power drainers. You never talk about any of these things. You're all in on sprints. You focus on sprints. You focus on mobility now. Spreading your argument on mobility, even though your whole argument was to do with sprint, how the game revolves around it. And now you've backtracked on that, and now you're saying mobility. Now we're talking about mobility, and you're not saying the game revolves around sprint, which was a ridiculous statement. Yet you don't come out and say it was a ridiculous statement. You just come out and flat out say that I made some mistakes. Well, what were they? What were the mistakes? Are you going to correct them? Nah, fuck it. I'll just fucking broaden my argument and pretend I know what I'm talking about.
Maybe omnidirectional man cannons. Maybe a Promethean teleporter gun, kind of like Unreal Tournament has, where yes, it allows you to break map movement, but it takes up a weapon slot and is a pickup on the map. Just ideas, not even sure I like the last one, but there's more than one way to solve a problem, and I think when you remove sprint from the equation, it forces creativity. Not just from developers on how they design things, but in the players with how they interact with the sandbox. Things like grenade hopping and hammer launching, and a bunch of other cool crazy tricks that players come up with. I could go on all day. This is a topic.
But sprint doesn't affect those. You can still do those with sprint. But then again, you're going to increase mobility, so clamber, so yeah. But that's because you've broadened your argument.
I'm passionate about, and I know when I'm done, this video goes up, I'll think of something I wish I had said, or figure out a way to explain it better, but just to wrap everything all up in a pretty little bow, a Halo game that doesn't have enhanced mobility is not an old-fashioned game. It isn't an archaic style, and its gameplay is not lacking. It's unique. It features combat and movement coexisting and interacting with one another seamlessly, with neither prohibiting the other from activating. In fact, the two come together harmoniously.
Well, that's an obvious statement, isn't it? You're clearly right there. It's not about whether a gameplay style is older than another one. It's about what works within a particular game. You don't want every game to be the same. Okay, but sprint is not this massive problem. There's far bigger problems in the game. And now you're broadening it into mobility again. Even the mobility is not the biggest problem in the game. Not by a long chalk. When you've got no split screen in the game. You know, these are big things that are way more important than talking about mobility. You can't even play co-op campaign with friends. I mean, that's huge.
Experience that other shooters on the market don't have, that Halo 5 doesn't have either. About 6 months ago, I made a video saying sprint can't be defended, that it has no possible benefit. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you like the strategy involved with choosing when and when not to sprint. Maybe you like the way it feels and it provokes some sense of fantasy and you feel like a Spartan. But can you be honest with me? To the people who support sprint, like it, and don't think it hurts the game, would you be able to play a game without it? Like the one I described, the one that doesn't play like anything else, the one that doesn't look back at the pack of FPS games behind it.
It's kind of an irrelevant argument because 343 will do whatever the fuck they want, and even if they took sprint out, the game would still suck fucking ass. That you can be sure of. So would I play a game without sprint? Maybe if 343 weren't the ones fucking developing it. Maybe if they got fucking Bungie off their ass or brought in some new people. Yeah, then I'd be up for whatever they did. I'd be open-minded. I'm not the sort of person that would deny myself a game just because they removed fucking sprint. Okay, I don't think anybody is. But that's not an argument for why they should remove it. That's just an argument for your personal preference and trying to get people on side with you that it's a good idea to remove it. When in actual fact, it makes literally no fucking difference to the gameplay. Literally hardly anything changes. Okay, you do this big fucking tangent about double melees and now you're not even mentioning them. Because you're wrong about double melees. You are. You didn't even mention them in the whole video. So you must be wrong about them. Okay, you're asserting scenarios. You assert scenarios. And I can just as easily assert those scenarios. So what I would say is, as somebody who was a massive Halo Reach fan, and that is basically the best fucking Halo game of all time, that doesn't mean I didn't like Halo 1. It doesn't mean I didn't like Halo 2. It doesn't mean I didn't like Halo 3. Just because I prefer fucking Halo Reach. But even though I think Reach is a great game, I actually think Bungie deliberately made Halo Reach to kind of kill off what 343 were going to do. I think they fucking deliberately sabotaged their own game. Because they pushed all this shit into the game, but because Bungie is so good at what they do, they can get it running. They can, with all this shit, even with all the shit they had in the game, it was still a good experience, still balanced, and still felt fucking like a Halo game. But you give all that clusterfuckage to somebody that hasn't got a fucking clue, and you get shit like Halo 4 and 5, which are just fucking terrible games. Okay, it's like night and day. Okay, Halo Reach to Halo 4 is night and day. There's no comparison. There's no comparison. Halo Reach to Halo 5, night and day. Okay, even Halo 4 to Halo 5, Halo 4 is better. And there's going to be people that fucking disagree with me on that. I don't give a fuck. Halo 5 is one of the worst fucking first-person shooter games I have ever fucking played. I don't even know how FAVYN can play it to fucking get footage in this video. I fucking hate that game with a passion. So, let's not even go there. Let's not surmise whether people would be happy to have a game with or without sprints when we have 343 in charge and basically there's a lot more fucking things we need to be discussing, really, other than sprint. That was my whole point in the first place, is that this whole campaign against sprint is not helping anybody. The whole problem is that we need to get 343 the fuck out of there, because they don't have a clue what they're doing. And we need fucking real content and a real fucking game again, not just fucking cheap shit and fucking games that are released fucking in pieces that we have to pay up front for. That's not fucking gaming. That's not how things should be. And you know, that's just gaming in general. That's not even a Halo thing. So you know, there's way bigger fucking fish to fry. Sprint is an irrelevant fucking argument along the fucking road that people just won't let go of.
For inspiration, but rather the one that says screw popular convention and looks forward into the abyss as it charges to the unknown, bringing back with it a formula that other games are covetous of. Would you play a game that tests your combat capabilities and your movement skill sets at the same time, where each map is meticulously designed for each zone to support both the movement and the combat? A style of map design that
Still not getting that Sprint doesn't do anything. Okay, developers build maps. Sprint does not build maps.
responsible for creating some of the most iconic and famous battlegrounds of all time. Would you play a game that so many people for almost 10 years have been begging for? And I realize it isn't just Sprint. There are plenty of other issues Halo has, and I cover a lot of them. But if that game came out, the game that didn't have Sprint, the game that didn't have enhanced mobility, game that was built using the formula I described throughout this video and bringing with it the appropriate map design, weapon balance, time to kill, could you play it? Could you like it? Could you maybe even learn to love it? You see, one thing I'm told over and over again as a classic Halo fan is that I need to adapt. I need to learn to use Sprint properly and get used to it. But I don't understand this because the last no Sprint Halo game released almost a decade ago. If Sprint was ever going to be something that fans of the old formula would just get used to or accept, we would have already stopped talking about it. Because if it was something as simple as just making things faster, if it was something that we didn't feel changed the experience at a significant level, then
Yes, but what you're saying is that nobody has just adapted to it, which is a flat-out bullshit. Okay, some people are not going to enjoy it, but then other people are. Some people have adapted. Some people probably play that crap you call Halo 5 and fucking enjoy it. But when you lose half your fan base, you're fucked up. They didn't lose half their fan base with Halo Reach. Halo Reach had a good steady population, and that game featured Sprint. So Sprint is not the problem. Sprint isn't the issue that made the fucking series lose half the fan base. Okay? That happened with the population in Halo 4, with the MCC, and with Halo 5. So what has gone on between Halo Reach, after Halo Reach, as in, and Halo 4 saw well, so sort of Halo 4 to now, what has been happening? What is the change? And you just have to blame 343. It's as simple as that. They are shit. Until we get some new developers in, or until 343 change their ways, which is pretty much impossible because they are so incompetent, we're not going to get another decent Halo game. So it's pretty much irrelevant. Whatever we say is irrelevant. So clearly it isn't Sprint that's the issue. Mobility could be the issue, because that started in Halo 5, and Halo 5 is it could just be ADS. ADS is a huge one, so that could be an issue. People don't want to buy Call of Duty, they want to play Halo. So Halo with Sprint is still Halo. Halo with thrusters and ADS may not feel like Halo. So there's something to think about.
would talk about it no more. Because we've had 6 years to adapt, and we still haven't forgotten what Halo was. So Sprint supporters, I hope I've been respectful to your opinion thus far, but ultimately it comes down to the same thing you always ask of us. When it comes to Halo not having Sprint, could you adapt?
When it comes to Halo not having Sprint, could you adapt? Okay. Nobody plays fucking Halo 5 anymore. FAVYN, you have adapted to Sprint. You must have done. You play Halo 5. I don't even play Halo 5. Okay, a lot of people don't even play Halo 5. You're sitting there playing Halo 5 and asking people, could you adapt to not having sprints, and you still haven't adapted to having it. Well, clearly you have adapted to having it and use it because you are playing the game. So one would expect you to have adapted. Adapted simply means being able to use something. So that's an incorrect statement because you're trying to say that you're still bitching about it, but that's not adapting. Adapting is where you just learn to use it. So you've completely lost the plot. You didn't bring up any of the points that I made in that other video. You didn't bring up anything. You know, there were good solid arguments for why things, and basically you've avoided every single point that I made that basically trashed your original arguments and broadened your fucking arguments into mobility. So this video was a complete waste of my time because now you're talking about mobility. You're not even just talking about sprint. Okay, you're trying to. It's a bit like a fucking political fucking spin job here. It's a bit of a political spin campaign you pulled here, where 1 minute you're talking about sprint and how the whole game revolves around it, and don't tell me that not what you meant, because that's exactly what you fucking said, word for word. And now you're talking about mobility. Mobility. Well, that's not fucking sprint, is it? We were talking about sprint. The argument was involving sprint. The video I did was about sprint. It wasn't about fucking mobility. And if you're going to do a video about mobility, then do it about fucking mobility. And include sprint as one part of it. But clearly you didn't do enough fucking research. You haven't talked about anything about sprint. You didn't raise that about double melees. You didn't raise about other power-ups that are way more overpowered than sprint, like fucking jetpacks and shit. And apparently they fucking all fucking break the game as well. So why is sprint this big issue? If ground pounding is this big issue, why is sprint such a big issue? Why is moving around a big issue when you've got instant kill ground pounds? Why is moving around a big issue when you've got armor lock? Why is moving around a big issue when you've got power drainers in Halo 3? Okay? Just because something is a bit overpowered in a game, that doesn't break the whole fucking game. In Smash Brothers, you've got Smash Balls. Do they break the game? Some people would say yes, some people would say no, but it's all relative, okay? It's all relative. It doesn't break the entire fucking game because of this one fucking thing, okay? So, this argument is a waste of fucking time. You've broadened your argument, you're off topic from what we were originally talking about. You're off topic from your original video. You've not done any fucking research into anything or proved shit. All you've done is asserted that your opinion is correct. That the game will be better off with better sprints because Resident Evil is better off without fucking better mobility. Which is an irrelevant argument. It doesn't prove shit. So that's my thoughts on that after just watching it. Just a quick one. We all saw that I fucking subscribed and liked FAVYN in the last vid, so this is not a fucking hate campaign against him, but clearly he doesn't fucking like me because he's going and he's talking to fucking LNG, he's talking to fucking Two Scratch Gamer, he's talking to fucking Fletch, and there's a little bit of a clique going on over there, and they're all fucking against me. Well, fucking go for it. I don't give a shit. I'm here for myself. I fight my own battles. I don't have little cliques of fucking YouTubers. Maybe I will in the future, but as of right now, I'm fighting for myself. So, hope you enjoy the video. Feel free to subscribe. See you fucking later.
Double kill.